My guest today on the Your Law Firm Success podcast is Brian Inkster. Brian is a very well kent figure, and as he describes himself or his firm as being an overnight success that's taken 25 years. In this discussion, we cover Brian's use of technology, his development of plug-and-play law, which is a hub-and-spoke approach for consultant solicitors to work under the Inkster's brand, but effectively run their own practice with a fee-sharing arrangement. And then we have a really good chat about Gen AI. Brian has become somewhat known on LinkedIn as a voice against the hype. And it was really, really good to get his take on that, which I think will resonate with quite a lot of you. So enjoy, and thanks for listening. All right. Well, Brian, thank you very much for coming in today. It's a pleasure to see you on this unusually sunny Scottish day. You're very well, as you say in Scotland, you're a well-kent figure, particularly within the Scottish legal scene, and I'm sure beyond, as a result of your profile on LinkedIn and other social channels. Twitter, you were a very early adopter of that, I seem to remember. Can we still call it that now?
Well, I would still call it that, but I've left as part of the exodus and gone to Blue Sky.
Right, okay. So I haven't joined that yet. You have been known for a number of years for your approach to innovation and deployment of technology as a legal services provider, but your background's perhaps a bit more interesting and gives some clues as to why you've gone down the route you have done. So perhaps you could tell us a bit more about that, and about Inksters in general as a law firm, how you established it, where it came from, before we go on to talk a bit more about its innovation.
Okay, so the kind of history is that I come originally from Shetland and moved to Edinburgh to study law in 1985 and came through to Glasgow in 1991, I think it was. Seems a long time ago now, doesn't it?
Yeah, yes.
To do my traineeship for a change of scenery. And I thought at the time I was maybe going to be here for just a couple of years doing the traineeship. I could then move on elsewhere. But as often happens, you end up not getting stuck, because that's the wrong word to say, but being comfortable where you're at and staying in the place that you're at. So I've been in Glasgow since the early 1990s. And I did a traineeship with a firm in Glasgow, became an assistant and then an associate there. And I was in that firm for about 8 years and was building up a client base where the majority of those clients at the time were from Shetland, which kind of surprised me because that's not what I expected to happen. But I would get family, friends, referrals coming to me from Shetland wanting me to do legal work. And it didn't seem to be a problem doing the legal work from Glasgow in Shetland even back then, even though the internet was in its infancy. People were still quite happy to speak on the phone, and I would make trips up to Shetland, which I'd be doing anyway, to see family and friends, but also specific trips to see clients. And it just seemed to grow. And I was getting people contacting me about all sorts of things, and I built up a practice. But it was getting to a stage that I was feeling I wasn't getting the support from the firm I was at to enable me to grow the business further. I was kind of working every hour that was sent to me and feeling that I needed sort of more hands and support to enable me to grow the business that I was in. And like a lot of firms, partnerships, the firm was looking more at the partners' retirements rather than the future of the firm, you know. And so they were happy for me to just
bring the fees in,
to chug away and carry on doing what I was doing without spending money to enable me to grow more of a business within the business. So I felt my only options at the time, and that was in 1999, was to either go to another firm, stick it out where I was at, or set up on my own. So that was really the driver for me setting up my own firm, because I probably realised at the time that going to another traditional law firm was probably just going to be much of a muchness, and I'd be in the same sort of situation and not being very happy about where I was at. So I took the plunge and set up Inskter on the 1st of May 1999, and at that time it was just me and a secretary who came with me from the firm I was in. And I gradually built the firm by taking on trainee solicitors, taking on assistants, taking on extra staff. And so it grew gradually. But I found that when you're looking to grow the firm from the lower levels by taking on young assistants or trainees, it's a long and slow process. A traineeship is 2 years, then they become an assistant in the firm. They're then getting, if they're a good solicitor, they're doing well, but it's taken a while to get to that stage, and it's involved a lot of effort and training to get them there. And then inevitably, they decide to go off somewhere else. And that's not because they don't like working at Inskter, it's because there's a big, bright world out there, and they want to see more of that world. And that's, increasingly more the case, that people don't have the staying power to stay in one place for a long time. I think there's lots of statistics that show that somebody will stay in a job typically for several years, but not for life. Maybe at one point in the dark history of law firms, people would see, their life in the law firm from when they did the traineeship until they became a partner. And you're seeing people who are changing careers. So they've decided, I've done my bit in law, I'm off to do something else. And there's several solicitors who did the traineeships at Inskter who are no longer in the law. They've gone off and done something else. So you feel at times that you're taking 2 steps forward and 3 back, and then you're having to start again. And it was really that process. And although we were growing, and we were, the firm was growing and becoming more successful, it wasn't happening at a great pace. And it was 12 years ago that I saw the changes happening in England and Wales through the Legal Services Act, and the fact that there, as a result of the Legal Services Act, people were looking at how they could do law differently, and there were different models and things arising in England, and in some cases experiments that failed, and
Tesco law.
Tesco law was how it was often described. People thought wrongly that the supermarkets would enter the law because they'd allowed non-solicitors to come into owning law firms, and that just didn't happen as such. And there've been plenty of failures along the way, but there's been successes in England and Wales with different models arising. And one thing that I saw happening was the fee-sharing model, where firms were looking after the overall support, insurance, technology, marketing for lawyers, but bringing in self-employed solicitors who worked under the umbrella and shared the fees with the law firm. And that, to me, seemed like a sensible concept. And you're thinking, why did no one do this before? I mean, I think there had been maybe pockets of it happening, but it hadn't been done to any great extent. And it actually is quite similar to how the Faculty of Advocates have operated for hundreds of years, where all the advocates in the Faculty of Advocates are self-employed, but they have stables where they employ clerks and administrative staff that they work under, and they pay them a share of their fees, in the same way as barristers operate in England. So I thought, why don't we try this? In England and Wales, a lot of this had come out of alternative business structures being allowed, and outside investment being allowed, and non-solicitors being allowed to own firms. But I couldn't see any reason why in Scotland, where we didn't have that ability, why a solicitor couldn't set up that type of model. So with that in mind, that's what I decided to do. And we did that coming up for 12 years ago now. And we've grown that again gradually, because we've been able to bring in more senior people who have a client following, and to begin with, because we wanted to make sure all the support and how it all worked was functioning properly, rather than trying to run before we could walk. And I didn't make a song and dance about it. People got to hear that this is what we were doing, and we brought people in and have kind of grown it quite steadily over the years. And for a while, we were operating a hybrid setup where we had employed solicitors and we had self-employed consultants. But we really moved kind of during the pandemic, or as we were coming out of the pandemic, away from that. And now we're wholly operating on the fee-sharing model. And we now have about 20 consultants with us. And we've started earlier this year marketing that more, and we're in discussions with quite a number at the moment of people who are interested in the model. And I think there's more of a realisation that this sort of model exists, and it's an option for solicitors to look at. And it's not going to suit everyone, but there's a certain type of solicitor that it will suit.
So, to go back, you were initially bringing the work from Shetland, which one would be a surprise for quite a lot of people because, and certainly at that time, it would be assumed that in order for a general practice solicitor, you'd need to be within the community that you were serving. Mm-hmm. The second thing, and we've discussed that before, is that, and it was a recent episode with Joy Kingsley where she talked about growing JMW and others through lateral hiring, effectively, which was bringing in people with significant experience in the case following, but that takes quite a lot of money if you're going to employ them. And I suppose, you were looking at it and going, well, actually, these trainees, they don't have a customer base, they don't have a network. And
then as a firm, you're having to spend effort to bring in the clients, to supply them with the clients so that they can do the work.
So that's probably quite challenging. So the combination of things combined with the fact that there's also this model beginning to appear, which was it the Pinsent Masons? Was that with the first one that was with?
They kind of have a different sort of model because they more, I believe, I may be speaking out of turn here, but they more supply lawyers more to companies on a kind of ad hoc basis as a kind of, what did he call it? More a kind of freelance model.
Right.
But it's not quite the same because that's where Pinsent Masons have work through clients to give to people, and it's more like allocating a solicitor to a company where they go in-house and they work for them. I believe that's the model.
Yeah.
It's more, the bigger ones in England that started out doing this were the likes of Gunnar Cook and the name escapes me now. Why is it gone? Setfords are now doing it.
Yeah.
But, there were several firms who started off doing that and have built up, and some of them have like 400 solicitors now operating under them. And it was seeing those firms, doing it. Keystone Law, that was the one I was thinking of. I think Keystone Law and Gunnar Cook were two of the main early ones doing it. And both of them, I think, have over 400 solicitors at the moment doing it. But there's a lot of other firms set up in England doing the same thing. There's probably a good 10 or more that are operating that model at a bit of scale, and a lot of other ones doing it at smaller scale.
And we discussed this prior to actually commencing the recording, the reasons as to why that's a model that's taken off more in England and in Scotland. Could you go into that a bit more in terms of investment and ownership, etc.?
I think it arose in England on the back of the Legal Services Act, which now must be, I can't remember what date that was, but it must be a good 15 years or so ago. And I think it's when the Legal Services Act came into being and allowed non-lawyers to own law firms, there was a lot of people looking at how they could do things differently, as I said earlier, and this was one of the models that came out of that. Although, as I also said earlier, I couldn't see any reason why that wasn't a model that had developed without alternative business structures and without outside investment. But clearly outside investment allows growth and allows those firms to grow faster because they get money pumped into them that wouldn't happen otherwise. So their ability to grow faster is there, which we've not got in Scotland, because unfortunately in Scotland, although there was a similar Legal Services Act in Scotland about 12 or more years ago.
So you've effectively, in comparison with some of those companies, you've been bootstrapping Inksters and have moved entirely to this, what I think was called the plug and play model.
I use the word plug and play law on the basis that lawyers can come along and plug into our infrastructure that we've set up and just get on and play and start concentrating on doing the law and letting us take care of a lot of the bureaucracy involved and the things involved in running a law firm, so they don't need to do that. And most lawyers went into law to do law, not necessarily to become business people, but a lot of them end up having to become business people, maybe unwillingly, because they become partners in law firms and have to take on all that entails. But there's a lot of lawyers out there that just want to concentrate on doing the law and serving clients and have somebody take care of the other stuff for them, which is what we can do.
And what about you?
What about me?
Yeah, in that regard, because you started off obviously as a lawyer, became business owner, so then moving into business. Now you're operating an almost entirely different model. Where do you sit in terms of your management versus legal work?
Well, I'm trying to avoid doing legal work if I can, but I keep getting hauled into things that I have specialities in, such as crofting law and the law of servitudes. And I don't mind doing bits of that just to keep my hand in and keep me mentally active as far as the law goes. But certainly, as the firm has grown, I have stopped doing a lot of day-to-day legal work and concentrated more on the management of the business. And at the moment, my concentration is really on growing the business by bringing in more consultant solicitors, on dealing with the financial aspects of the business and the marketing of the business. And we brought in a year ago, or over a year ago, a chief operating officer for the first time to concentrate more on the management of the employed staff, the back office support, the technology, and the general running of the offices. You know.
So you mentioned that at the outset around technology. Obviously, that's a major part for you. In order to deliver this plug and play law model, you know, it has to be an almost seamless entry. Can you tell us a bit more about your approach to tech?
I've always had an interest in technology from an early stage, and I suppose it goes back to even just as a schoolboy having a Dragon computer and then a BBC microcomputer and so on. So I've always had a kind of interest in using computers. And when you get into the law, that probably develops. And when I set up Inskter in 1999, I saw it as very important at day one to have a good practice management system that dealt with both accounts and dealt with client record management and case management. And I invested a lot of money at day one in just having all of that. And I think that set was in a really good state by having a good system in the early days and keeping enhancing and improving that as time went on. And when you see things developing and changing in technology and the law, trying to adapt to it where necessary, and I think there's sometimes it's not necessary just to chase after the next shiny new toy, and I'm sure we'll come on to discuss that. But for example, what we are doing with plug and play law, we have a network of solicitors in 12 different locations throughout Scotland now, and that wouldn't have worked without the cloud. And we were an early adopter of a cloud technology and moving all our systems into the cloud, and we did that in 2011. And you know, there were lots of firms scurrying around during the pandemic to do that because they had on-premises equipment and so on. And I think being an early adopter of moving into the cloud was important because it allowed us to really have consultant solicitors working anywhere. And Also, we were early adopters of VoIP phone technology, so we had that about the same time, which allowed solicitors to be operating in the rural locations around Scotland, but still connecting through our sort of switchboard infrastructure, which made life quite seamless for them and allowed the support from the Glasgow hub to the various spokes outside Glasgow.
I suppose as a result of the model, you've ended up both being keen on it and adopting it, and from an individual solicitor's point of view, what should they expect when they come and join this model?
They should expect all the kind of support that you would have in a traditional law firm, and hopefully a little bit more. I mean, we've had solicitors surprised by the kind of level of technology we're deploying compared with what they've been used to. For example, I basically coined the phrase, because it wasn't in use as far as I'm aware before that, when we introduced to the firm a number of years ago a legal process engineer. And that's because I saw a need to have someone who was properly implementing the case management system we had within the firm. Most law firms will buy off the shelf a case management system, and then they never properly implement it.
Yeah, they use about 10% of it. If that.
Probably less. And a lot of it becomes what's sometimes referred to as shelfware, where it's just really sitting on the shelf unused, gathering dust. And usually that's down to the solicitors just not having the time themselves to spend on making that technology work for them in a way that makes them more efficient. Because they're concentrating on their next job. They're concentrating on getting the law done and generating fees. And in small practices especially, they've not got the extra manpower to be dedicated on doing that. And unless the solicitor, like myself, has a particular interest in technology and efficiencies and seeing how that can all work, and are willing to spend their spare time, shall we say, when they're not doing their fee-earning work, doing that, it's just not going to happen. And I think you find that in law firms up and down the country, that they might have technology, they may have purchased technology, but they are just not really implementing it in the way that they could and should. And so I saw the answer being bringing in someone who could just be dedicated to that task. And so we brought in a legal process engineer, and I called them a legal process engineer because I saw the need for looking specifically at processes. What does a lawyer do in a day when they're dealing with a conveyancing transaction? Where does it start? Where does it finish? And in between that, what's all the steps that they take? Yeah. And how can we use technology to make that process more efficient? And with a good case management system, it'll have document automation where you can put in the variables once, but have lots of templates set up that just pull them in. Yeah. So for a conveyancing transaction, you'll have the names of the parties, you'll have the property address, you'll have the price, you'll have the title number from Registers of Scotland, you'll have a date of entry. Those are the variables, but a lot of the documentation that are used throughout the transaction stay the same. And if you can get that all set up, it means that you can go through a transaction much more efficiently by just clicking on buttons and documents appearing and being automatically filled. Yeah. But there's lots of solicitors out there that will be still calling up a template that they've got, copying and pasting and typing in stuff over and over again, the same thing in various documents, with also the potential error, because each time they input the same information in different documents, there could be typographical errors or so on. If you make sure in our system that the data is correct first time around, it'll always appear the same way each time you do a different part of that transaction. And this, we talked about that before. I think I've mentioned this before in relation to Digby Brown, who I worked with as a trainee in their very early adoption of workflows and automation. And so recently,
And for those of you who spend any time LinkedIn or are interested in this subject, you'll notice that Brian has been railing against, to a certain extent, some of the enthusiasm or hype around AI. And I think it goes back to this automation point, does it not?
Yeah, I mean, I think, maybe not rail against, it's maybe railing against the hype surrounding it.
Yeah.
I've got no problem with new technology coming along that's going to assist us and augment what we've already got and make our lives easier. But it seems that the whole generative AI thing, and I'll say generative AI because that's, a couple of years ago, that's where this all started again. And I say again because we go through 5-year cycles where we speak about AI. We've been there before. I remember 5 or more years ago going to legal conferences where they were speaking about AI being the next big thing.
Is that Watson, etc.?
Yeah. And look what happened to Watson. It didn't really come to anything. But everybody thought it was going to. And it was the big chat at legal tech conferences that AI was coming, lawyers needed to get ready for it and everything else. And here we are another 5 years later, and suddenly nothing really happened much in the 5 years before, where we were being told amazing things were going to happen. Then generative AI comes along with a big fanfare and is the best thing since sliced bread. And everybody's jumping on the bandwagon and thinking that, this is going to revolutionize the practice of law and revolutionize lots of other industries. But, generative AI is really something that takes a lot of words and joins them together and sometimes gets it right and sometimes doesn't. It doesn't really know or understand exactly what it's doing. It's not thinking. It's not actually intelligent. It's just a system that's been developed that allows, from lots and lots of data, the ability to string words together. And people think lawyers do words. So this is clearly going to replace lawyers because this is a machine that does words. But it really is just a parrot that spits out words without really thinking or understanding what those words are. And in a lot of cases, it is what has become known as hallucinating. It hallucinates. And it just spits out garbage, or gibberish, as one American judge called it. And so there's a danger there. And people who are advocates of the hype are quick and keen to say, oh, it'll just get better. This is at its very worst, but in a year or two's time, it'll be amazing. Well, will it? We need to wait and see. It's already been around for 2 years. It's still hallucinating. No one's been able to get rid of its ability to hallucinate. And there's lots of people who think that that's an impossibility because that's just an inbuilt feature. Microsoft came up with a term, what was it now? Usefully something, usefully wrong, or usefully, as though it was useful to be making errors. How's that useful?
Yeah.
And lawyers operate in a world of precision and a world where you need to get things right. You can't just be making mistakes, and you can't just be allowing a computer system to be used that you have to spend a lot of time double checking and triple checking to make sure it's correct. So I suppose I am a bit skeptical about it. I'm not saying it doesn't have its uses. I'm not saying that in limited extents at the moment it's not something that could be used purposefully to maybe get answers or information or do things a little bit quicker. One of the uses people speak about is summarizing, where you're taking an existing long document and you're asking it to summarize, and it'll do that very quickly and effectively. And for some people, that might be a very useful task to do. And it's less likely when it's dealing with that set of information to hallucinate in the process, because it's not looking at a huge data set. But even to that extent, how often are solicitors actually summarizing things? And if you are summarising, say, for example, a court case, because you need to summarise that court case for a specific client, for a specific point of law, does ChatGPT know what the specific detail is? Okay, you can prompt it, but is it going to pull out of that case the actual important point that you need for the case you're dealing with? And I mean, I've seen myself dealing with court cases that sometimes all you need from a case is one sentence. ChatGPT is not going to know what that one sentence is, and it might well in a summary miss it. And really, I think it's very difficult to get beyond the fact that a lawyer, with all the training that the lawyer has and all the knowledge of the case they are working on, and the salient points in a previous case that might be relevant to that, knows how to find that when reading a case. And if you rely on a machine summarising that case for you, you may well miss the important point that you should have found if you had sitting down and read the whole case.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's 100% true. I mean, the ChatGPT is not going to understand the context of your relationship, the context of your relationship with the opposing parties or with the opposing parties' solicitors, the point that's of utmost relevance to this individual situation and for your client. It's never going to know that. And I think part of the thing for you, as far as I understand it, is that actually you're saying, let's not get distracted by that now. This is an opportunity to shine a light on technology that has been available for years, that in fact the vast majority of firms aren't deploying.
Exactly. I mean, document automation systems have been around for a good 30 years, have been probably, very good and able to be used very well over the past 15 or 20 years, and are improving all the time. And it may well be that providers of those document automation systems start introducing elements of ChatGPT that can augment and enhance them. But why suddenly go away and get distracted by playing with, say, ChatGPT at the moment, than implementing technology that you've probably actually got in your practice that you've not even started to implement? And there's some chat about ChatGPT, being able to draft things from scratch. Why on earth would you do that? Why would you ask a machine, draft me a contract, to do something from scratch and just put in a prompt and hit it find this contract? Now, is it going to find a contract that is suitable under Scottish law? Where's it finding this contract from? How long are you going to have to spend going over that and making sure it's correct? Maybe things being missed out that are relevant. Each time you ask ChatGPT to produce something, it'll produce something different. It's not going to produce the same thing every time. So, why would you do that? And people seem to be, and I actually had this debate on LinkedIn just this past week, they seem to have a lack of understanding that lawyers have operated for centuries using templates and styles. Although I discovered this past week that in England they don't use the word styles or templates, it's precedents. So, in Scotland we usually refer to templates or styles, but in England precedent is the common usage. But solicitors have always used that. Even before the days of computers, there would be books that would have styles in them that people would use. I remember in my early days working in a law office before I even started a traineeship, where there were printed documents that you could fill in the blanks using a typewriter. There were templates there that were used to speed up and improve and enhance and make efficiencies without starting from scratch and starting from a blank page. But there seems to be, we seem to have gone to this school of thought that, you just need to start from a blank page and let ChatGPT do it for you. I mean, it's a nonsense.
I suppose in elements there's a public perception around it, in that although you're aware of styles and precedents, there's a perception sometimes amongst the public that they sort of have an idea or an inkling that that's being used by lawyers. However, they don't ever seem to feel the benefit of that efficiency in their pockets. And I imagine that's why, to a certain extent, there's also been a bit of an upswell around the use of Gen AI or Gen AI replacing lawyers. It's because actually, well, they deserve that because they've not passed on.
Well, I think probably we've seen, say, in conveyancing, where conveyancing fees are very competitive and over the years, came down a lot. A lot of solicitors had to look at how to make the conveyancing process more efficient, in order to enable them to provide the service they do at the level of fees that they are now charging. So I think there's an element that actually the customer has seen a benefit in solicitors becoming more efficient through the use of technology. They may not appreciate that, but I think that has happened. And I think there's certainly solicitors who have seen a need to automate more because of price competitiveness.
Okay, and well, that's very interesting, Brian. Thanks for that. I mean, I generally ask guests for their definition of law firm success. Have you got one?
It's been said that it takes 25 years to become an overnight success. I've now been at this for 25 years. And it's a hard and long struggle. It's not easy. But I'd like to think that now we're getting to a point over those 25 years that we are becoming an overnight success. But what do you see as being the success? I suppose that's the question you're really asking. For me, it is seeing me move from a situation where I was in a traditional law firm that were not willing to help me grow my business within their business, to a situation where I am now, hopefully, I've created a law firm that allows solicitors to join us, where I can help support them to grow their business within our business, and by taking away from them a lot of the hassles and administrative and red tape that they would have to deal with, so they can concentrate on the law and hopefully be less stressed as a result of that in operating their own little businesses within Inskter. And as a result of that they will be happier lawyers because of the infrastructure that we've put in place that allows them to work in a better way. And ultimately that will be seen by their clients in the service that each of those solicitors can provide.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for that, Brian.
Thank you.
So thanks very much for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're enjoying our content. We'd be delighted to hear any feedback that you have. You can find out more about the Your Law Firm Success podcast at mltdigital.co.uk/podcast. Please subscribe. Please share with your friends. Please share with anyone who you know that you think would be interested.